My name is Elijah. I've always considered myself an urban creature, a graphic designer who spends most days hunched over my laptop in coffee shops whose idea of adventure is trying a new fusion restaurant in a sketchy part of town. My apartment in Seattle is the very definition of city living with a view of the Space Needle from my tiny balcony. And the constant hum of traffic as my soundtrack, nature for me had always been something to appreciate from a distance, preferably through the lens of a National Geographic documentary or Instagram posts from more outdoorsy friends. Fred was different. My friend since college, Fred was the human embodiment of an REI catalog, always planning his next hiking trip, rock climbing excursion, or whitewater rafting adventure. His apartment was filled with specialized gear for every conceivable outdoor activity, and his skin perpetually maintained the healthy tan of someone who spent weekends scaling mountain faces rather than binge-watching Netflix. Despite our differences, or perhaps because of them, we'd maintained a solid friendship for nearly a decade, each of us drawing the other slightly out of our respective comfort zones. For months, Fred had been trying to convince me to join him on a backpacking trip through the Cascade Mountains. "It'll change your life," he insisted repeatedly, showing me photos of breathtaking vistas and serene alpine lakes. I'd always declined, citing deadlines, my general physical unfitness, or an allergy to mosquitoes that I'd invented specifically for these conversations. But when Fred's regular hiking partner broke his ankle 2 days before a planned 3-day trip along the Pacific Crest Trail, something unexpected happened. I found myself agreeing to go. Perhaps it was the genuine disappointment in Fred's voice when he called to cancel our weekly dinner plans. Or maybe it was the realization that at 32 I'd begun to feel the narrowing of my experiences, the comfort of routine calcifying into something like stagnation. "You're serious?" Fred asked, disbelief evident even through the phone. "You'll come with me, don't sound so shocked," I replied, already regretting my impulsive offer. "I can handle a walk in the woods." His laughter was both amused and slightly concerning. "Elijah, this isn't a walk in the woods, it's a 27 mi trail with significant elevation gain. We'll be camping 2 nights. The specifics made my stomach clench with anxiety, but some stubborn part of me refused to back down. "I assume you have extra gear I can borrow." "Of course," he said, excitement now replacing the surprise in his voice, "and we can tone down the route a bit. Since it's your first time, take some shortcuts, make it easier." That's how I found myself 2 days later sitting in Fred's Subaru as we drove east from Seattle toward the trailhead, surrounded by borrowed camping equipment that seemed unnecessarily complicated and ominously heavy. Fred spent the 2-hour drive giving me a crash course in wilderness survival, how to filter water, the importance of layering clothes, what to do if we encountered a bear, play dead for grizzlies, fight back against black bears. Information I sincerely hoped would remain theoretical. "The weather report looks perfect," Fred said as we neared our destination. "Clear skies today, some clouds tomorrow, but nothing serious." I nodded, trying to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. The familiar cityscape had long since given way to dense forests and mountains that seemed to loom ever larger as we approached. I was far outside my comfort zone already, and we hadn't even started hiking. The trailhead parking lot was nearly empty when we arrived, just a couple of other cars with bumper stickers announcing their owners' outdoor enthusiasm. Fred helped me adjust my borrowed backpack, which felt like it contained several small boulders. Despite his assurance that he'd only packed the essentials. "Ready?" he asked, his expression a mixture of excitement and concern. With his tousled brown hair, sun-watered skin, and athletic build, Fred looked like he belonged on the cover of an outdoor magazine. I, on the other hand, felt like an imposter in my new hiking boots and moisture-wicking shirt, both purchased in a panic the day before. "As I'll ever be," I replied, forcing a confidence I didn't feel. The first few hours weren't as bad as I'd feared. The trail was well-maintained, the weather was perfect as promised, and Fred set a reasonable pace, frequently stopping to point out interesting plants or spectacular views. I found myself enjoying the rhythmic motion of walking, the fresh scent of pine, and the gradual quieting of my typically overactive mind. See, it's not so terrible, Fred said when we stopped for lunch on a rocky outcropping overlooking a valley of evergreens. Admit it, you're having fun. I was. Surprisingly, it's not bad, I conceded, unwilling to give him the full satisfaction, though I reserve the right to complain when my muscles start screaming. Tomorrow, Fred laughed, passing me a trail mix heavy on chocolate pieces. He'd remembered my preference. Your body will adjust and the views only get better from here. We set out again after lunch, the trail gradually becoming steeper and more challenging. By mid-afternoon, the easy conversation we'd maintained earlier had dwindled as I focused more on controlling my breathing and ignoring the growing discomfort in my shoulders and thighs. Fred noticed. Of course, we'll make camp soon, he promised. There's a great spot by a small lake about 2 mi ahead, nearly halfway done with today's section. I nodded, not wanting to waste breath on speech. The forest around us had changed subtly as we climbed higher, the trees spaced further apart, the underbrush less dense. Despite my physical discomfort, I found myself appreciating the shifting patterns of sunlight through branches, the occasional glimpse of distant peaks, the absolute absence of car horns and sirens. We were about a mile from our planned campsite when I first noticed the clouds. They appeared suddenly over a ridge ahead, dark and heavy with moisture. Fred saw them too, his expression shifting from relaxed to concerned. That's not in the forecast, he muttered, pulling out his phone. No service here. Of course, is it a problem? I asked, eyeing the approaching clouds nervously. Probably just a passing shower, Fred said, but his tone lacked conviction. Let's pick up the pace, try to reach the campsite before it hits. We moved faster, the trail becoming more rocky and uneven. I stumbled several times, my city legs unused to navigating such terrain. The sky continued to darken ominously and the temperature dropped noticeably, a cold wind whipping through the trees. The first raindrops hit as we crossed a small stream, fat and heavy, quickly increasing in intensity. Within minutes we were caught in a downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. This way, Fred shouted over the increasingly loud drumming of rain on leaves. There's a branch in the trail. We can take a shortcut to the campsite. I followed him, struggling to keep pace as he turned onto a narrower, less distinct path that veered sharply to the right. The rain was coming down in sheets now, soaking through my supposedly waterproof jacket. The path became steeper, more treacherous, slick mud making each step precarious. Time blurred as we pushed forward through the deluge. My world narrowed to the few feet of trail visible ahead and Fred's back as he led the way. Occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the forest in stark momentary clarity, followed by thunderous booms that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Fred, I finally called out, voice barely audible above the storm, should we find shelter instead? He turned back, rain streaming down his face. We're almost there, he shouted, just a little further. But as we continued, the trail became increasingly unfamiliar even to Fred. I could see it in the hesitation of his movements, the way he frequently paused to look around, consulting the compass attached to his backpack strap. Sinking feeling in my stomach had nothing to do with hunger or exertion. We're lost, aren't we? I finally asked. During a brief lessening of the rain, Fred's reluctance to meet my eyes was answer enough. I think I took the wrong turn at that stream crossing, he admitted. This isn't the trail I remember. Fear, sharp and cold, settled in my chest. So what do we do? Fred's outdoor experience asserted itself as he quickly shifted into problem-solving mode. First priority is getting out of this rain and finding shelter. Then we'll assess our situation, figure out how to get back to the main trail. I nodded, grateful for his competence. Despite the anxiety clawing at my throat, we continued moving more slowly now, searching for anything that might offer protection from the relentless rain. The daylight was fading rapidly, both from the natural progression of evening and the heavy cloud cover. There, Fred suddenly pointed ahead. Through the curtain of rain, I could make out a dark opening in a rocky hillside, not quite a cave but a deep overhang that promised at least some shelter. We made our way toward it, slipping and sliding on the increasingly muddy ground. The overhang was about 8 ft deep and 6 ft high, the floor relatively dry near the back. We huddled inside, dropping our sodden backpacks with twin thuds. "Well," Fred said, attempting lightness, "this is an adventure." I shot him a withering look. "Is that what we're calling it?" His smile faltered. "I'm sorry, Elijah, I should have checked the weather more carefully, should have stayed on the main trail." The genuine remorse in his voice deflated my budding anger. "It's not your fault," I sighed. "You couldn't have predicted this storm." Fred nodded gratefully, then shifted into practical action. "We need to get dry and warm. These wet clothes are going to be a problem as the temperature drops." He was right. Despite my exhaustion, I could feel myself shivering, my soaked clothing clinging uncomfortably to my skin. Fred dug through his backpack, which had better waterproofing than mine, and pulled out a small camping stove. "The good news is we can make hot drinks," he said, setting up the stove near the mouth of our shelter. "The bad news is most of our gear is probably soaked." My backpack confirmed his prediction. Everything from my spare clothes to my sleeping bag was damp to completely wet. Fred's gear had fared slightly better thanks to his higher quality pack, but even his extra clothing was too wet to offer much comfort. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. Rain continued to pour, occasional gusts of wind driving it almost horizontally across the landscape. Darkness was falling quickly, the forest beyond our small shelter fading into shadowy indistinctness. Fred prepared hot tea, using water from his canteen and the small stove passing me a steaming metal cup. The warmth against my palms was wonderful, but it did little to address the larger problem of our wet clothing and dropping temperatures. "We need to get out of these wet clothes," Fred said after we'd finished our tea, stating what I already knew but was reluctant to acknowledge. "Hypothermia is a real risk up here, especially overnight." "And change into what?" I asked, gesturing to our equally wet spare clothing. Fred hesitated, then spoke with careful neutrality. "We don't change into anything. Body heat is our best resource right now." I stared at him, the implications slowly sinking in. "You're saying we should take off our wet clothes and share body heat?" "Yes," he finished. "Matter of fact, it's standard wilderness survival. Wet clothing drains heat much faster than no clothing at all." Objectively, I knew he was right. This was a practical solution to a potentially dangerous situation. But the thought of being completely naked with Fred, my friend of nearly a decade, sent a confusing mix of anxiety and something else I couldn't quite name spiraling through me. "We'll use our emergency blanket," Fred continued, pulling a silvery folded square from his pack. "It's not much, but it's dry and will help reflect our body heat." I nodded stiffly, rationality overcoming my initial hesitation. "Okay, if that's what we need to do." Fred gave me a reassuring smile. "I promise to respect your virtue." The joke, mild as it was, broke some of the tension. I managed a small laugh. "My virtue is the least of my concerns right now." We turned away from each other, a pointless courtesy given what was coming, and began peeling off our sodden layers. I worked methodically, trying to ignore the way my fingers trembled, both from cold and a strange nervousness. T-shirt, thermal layer, hiking pants, socks. Each item removed exposed my skin to the chilly air, raising goosebumps across my body. When I was down to just my underwear, I hesitated. Behind me, I heard the rustle of Fred's movements. Similarly, pause. "On three," he suggested, his voice strangely tight. "Sure," I agreed, oddly grateful for the countdown. 1, 2, 3. I slid off my underwear immediately, wrapping my arms around myself against the cold. Slowly, I turned around, unsure where to look. Fred stood a few feet away, similarly naked and visibly uncomfortable despite his outdoor expertise. In the dim light filtering through the rain, I could see his athletic build, the definition in his chest and arms, the trail of hair leading down from his navel. I quickly averted my eyes, feeling heat rise to my face despite the chill. Fred unfolded the emergency blanket, the material crinkling loudly in the small space. "Come here," he said, his voice forcefully casual. "Back to back is probably easiest." I nodded and moved toward him. We sat on our folded Sleeping bags which provided minimal cushioning against the hard ground, but at least some insulation from below. Fred wrapped the emergency blanket around our shoulders, the material barely large enough to enclose us both. Our backs pressed together, skin to skin, the contact sending an unexpected jolt through me. Fred was warm despite our situation, his body radiating heat that my chilled skin gratefully absorbed. We sat rigidly at first, each trying to maintain as much propriety as possible given the circumstances. Try to relax, Fred advised after a few minutes of uncomfortable silence. Tension wastes energy we need for warmth. I made a conscious effort to release the stiffness in my shoulders, letting my back settle more naturally against his. He was right, it was warmer this way, our bodies sharing heat more efficiently. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain drumming against the ground, wind howling through the trees. Darkness had fallen completely now, the only light coming from Fred's small headlamp, which he'd positioned nearby to create a dim glow. In our shelter, how long do you think the storm will last? I asked, desperate for conversation to distract from our awkward situation. Hard to say, Fred replied, his voice vibrating slightly against my back. Mountain weather is unpredictable, could clear by morning. Could last longer, and if it's still raining tomorrow. I felt him shift slightly, then we try to find our way back to the main trail, rain or not. We have enough food for a few days, but if we can't dry out our gear, exposure becomes a serious concern. The gravity of our situation settled over me. This wasn't just an uncomfortable night, we were in potential danger. As if reading my thoughts, Fred spoke again, his tone reassuring. Don't worry too much, I've contacted my emergency contact with our planned route before we left. If we don't check in by our scheduled return time, they'll alert search and rescue. How long would that take? I asked. We were due back day after tomorrow. Add in some response time, 3 days, maybe 4 at most, before someone comes looking. 3 or 4 days in these conditions seemed like an eternity. I shivered, not entirely from cold, and Fred must have felt it. We should probably adjust, he said after a moment. Back to back isn't the most efficient for warmth. What do you suggest? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Side by side would be better, more contact surface. There was a carefully professional quality to his words, as if he were reciting from a wilderness survival manual rather than suggesting we press our naked bodies together more intimately. I swallowed hard. Okay, we shifted awkwardly, the emergency blanket crinkling loudly as we maneuvered under its limited coverage. Eventually, we settled side by side, shoulders and hips pressed together, the blanket wrapped around us as tightly as possible. It was warmer, undeniably, but also more intensely personal. Better, Fred asked, his voice unexpectedly close to my ear. Warmer, I acknowledged, striving for the same clinical tone he'd maintained. Time passed strangely in our small shelter, the constant sound of rain, the shared warmth and exhaustion from our difficult day created a dreamlike atmosphere. Conversation came in sporadic bursts, periods of comfortable silence stretching between topics. We talked about work, mutual friends, movies we'd seen recently. Ordinary subjects that felt surreal in our extraordinary circumstances. As the night deepened, the temperature continued to drop. Our side-by-side position, while better than back-to-back, wasn't quite enough. I found myself shivering again, my teeth chattering slightly despite my efforts to control it. This isn't working well enough, Fred observed, concern evident in his voice. We need to conserve more heat. I'm open to suggestions, I said through clenched teeth. Fred hesitated only briefly. We need to lie down front to front, maximum contact. It's the most effective way to share body heat. Suggestion sent a nervous flutter through my stomach. Spooning, you mean? Essentially, yes, Fred admitted. I know it's awkward, but it's also the best way to get through the night without hypothermia. He was right, of course. My discomfort was trivial compared to the very real danger of our situation. Okay, I agreed. We rearranged ourselves yet again, this time lying down on our sides. Fred's chest pressed against my back, his arm draped over my waist to keep me close. The emergency blanket covered us both, though our feet still stuck out slightly at the bottom. The position was undeniably intimate, more so than I'd ever been with Fred in our years of friendship, but also undeniably warmer. "Is this okay?" Fred asked, his breath warm against the back of my neck. "Yes," I said, surprised too. "Find I meant it." Despite the initial awkwardness, there was something deeply comforting about the human contact. About not facing the cold and darkness alone. Minutes passed, perhaps longer. The steady rhythm of Fred's breathing against my back gradually lulled my anxiety, replacing it with a drowsy warmth. Just as I was beginning to drift toward sleep, Fred spoke, his voice quiet in the darkness. "I've been wanting to tell you something," he said, "probably not the best timing, but I don't know, facing potential disaster makes things seem more urgent." I came fully awake, suddenly aware of every point of contact between our bodies. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, the expansion of his chest pressing more firmly against my back. "I've had feelings for you for a while now, more than friendship feelings." The words hung in the air between us, impossibly heavy. My mind raced, reviewing years of interactions in this new light. Fred's consistent presence in my life, his patience with my reluctance to join his outdoor adventures, the way his eyes sometimes lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking. "You don't have to say anything," he continued into my silence. "I know this is weird timing and I'm not expecting anything. If things go badly with this storm, I didn't want to never have said it." My heart was pounding so hard I was certain he could feel it. "How long?" I managed to ask. "A couple of years, maybe longer," Fred admitted. "I wasn't always conscious of it. It just sort of grew over time." I lay still, processing this revelation. Fred had been my closest friend for nearly a decade, a constant and reliable presence in my life. Had there been something more there all along, something I hadn't allowed myself to see? "I'm sorry if I've made things uncomfortable," Fred said, misinterpreting my silence. "We can just forget I said anything." "No," I interrupted, surprising myself. "I'm glad you told me. I need to think." Fred nodded. The movement felt rather then seen. "Of course, no pressure." We lapsed into silence again, but it was different now, charged with unspoken questions and possibilities. Despite the circumstances, despite the cold and discomfort and uncertainty of our situation, I found my mind filled not with fear, but with Fred's confession. Turning it over and examining it from all angles, had I ever thought of Fred as more than a friend? I'd always appreciated his physical attractiveness in an objective way, admired his confidence and competence, valued his presence in my life more than almost anyone else's, but I'd never consciously considered the possibility of something romantic between us. Or had I simply never allowed myself to consider it? Too afraid of risking our friendship, too comfortable in the patterns we'd established. The storm continued. Outside, rain occasionally gusting against our shelter, but it seemed distant now, less important than the storm of thoughts in my mind. Fred's breathing had evened out, suggesting he might have fallen asleep despite the tension of his revelation. I envied his apparent calm. I must have eventually drifted off because I woke to a changed quality of light filtering into our shelter. The rain had stopped, though water still dripped from trees and rocks outside. Fred was already awake, his body still pressed against mine, but somehow more alert. "Morning," he said when he felt me stir. "Storm's past, that's good," I replied, suddenly acutely aware of our nakedness, of the arms still draped over my waist, of the conversation left unresolved between us. "Should we try to dry out our gear?" Fred seemed to sense my discomfort and slowly withdrew his arm, creating a small space between us, though we remained under the emergency blanket. "Yeah, that's the plan. We should take advantage of any sunlight, try to dry the essentials at least." We separated fully, both reaching for our wet clothing with perhaps more haste than necessary. The morning chill made me grateful for even damp fabric against my skin. Once somewhat dressed, we ventured out of our shelter to assess the situation. The landscape had transformed overnight. What had been merely a forested hillside in yesterday's downpour was revealed as a stunning vista. Our shelter was set into a rocky outcropping that overlooked a small valley, mountains rising majestically in the distance. Sunlight sparkled on rain's slick leaves and stones, creating a world that seemed washed clean and new. It's beautiful, I said momentarily, forgetting the discomfort of wet clothes and the awkwardness of Fred's confession. Fred nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. This is why I keep telling you to come hiking with me. We laid out our gear in sunny patches, hoping to dry at least some of it before deciding on our next move. Fred studied his map, trying to determine where exactly we had gone wrong and how to find our way back to the main trail. As we worked side by side, I kept stealing glances at him, seeing my old friend in a new light. In the morning sunlight, drops of water still clinging to his hair, focused intently on the map spread across a flat rock. He looked both familiar and somehow new to me. I thought about his confession in the darkness, about the warmth of his body against mine, about years of friendship that had perhaps been gradually evolving into something else without my conscious awareness. I think I know where we are, Fred announced, pointing to a spot on the map. If I'm right, we're actually not far from a ranger station, maybe 4 miles that way. He gestured toward the east, our gear's still pretty wet. But if we pack up and start now, we could reach it by early afternoon. I nodded, relieved to have a concrete plan. Sounds good to me. We packed our still damp equipment, the process companionable despite the undercurrent of unspoken thoughts between us, as Fred helped adjust my backpack straps. His hands lingered briefly on my shoulders, the touch sending an unexpected warmth through me. Despite the cool morning air, about what I said last night, he began, his voice carefully neutral. We don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. I understand if you need time or if you don't feel the same way. I turned to face him, struck by the vulnerability in his expression. Fred, who was always so confident, now looked uncertain and exposed in a way that had nothing to do with our survival situation. I think I do want to talk about it, I said slowly, just maybe when we're not lost in the wilderness and wearing damp underwear. His laugh was genuine relief, evident in the relaxing of his shoulders. Fair enough, comfortable surroundings and dry clothes would definitely improve the conversation. We set out toward the ranger station, the going much easier in daylight and clear weather. The forest around us was vibrant after the rain, birds calling to each other among the dripping branches, occasional sunbeams breaking through the canopy to create pools of golden light on the forest floor. As we walked, I found myself hyper-aware of Fred's presence beside me, the rhythm of his breathing, the occasional brush of his arm against mine when the trail narrowed, the way he constantly checked to make sure I was keeping up. Had he always been this attentive, and I'd simply categorized it as friendly concern? About an hour into our hike, we stopped to rest on a fallen log. Fred offered me his water bottle, our fingers brushing during the exchange. Contact, brief as it was, sent a now familiar tingle up my arm. Can I ask you something? I said, surprising myself with the question forming in my mind. Fred looked up, expectant. Of course. Was this trip asking me to come with you when your regular partner canceled? Was that because of your feelings for me? He considered the question, his expression thoughtful. Not consciously. I've been asking you to come hiking with me for years, remember? But I won't deny that the prospect of spending 3 days alone with you was appealing. Even though you knew I'd be terrible at it, I gestured to our current situation as evidence. Fred's smile was warm. You're not terrible at it. A little unexpected weather and a wrong turn could happen to anyone. And besides, he paused, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. I like showing you things you haven't experienced before. I like seeing the world through your eyes. Sometimes the simple honesty of his statement touched something deep within me. How many people genuinely wanted to see the world through someone else's perspective? How many would go to such lengths to share their passions, even when the other person had shown only reluctance? We should keep going, Fred said after a moment, standing and adjusting his pack. I'd like to reach the ranger station before any more weather moves in. We continued our journey, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, work projects, a mutual friend's recent engagement, a movie we'd both been wanting to see. But underlying the familiar banter was a new awareness, at least on my part, of possibilities I hadn't previously considered. It was Early afternoon when we finally spotted the ranger station, a small rustic cabin set in a clearing ahead. The sight of the weathered wooden structure was perhaps the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, representing safety and a return to civilization. As we approached, a figure emerged from the cabin, a uniformed ranger who looked surprised to see hikers approaching from the direction we'd come. "You folks all right?" she called out, walking toward us. "You're coming from an undecided trail area." Fred explained our situation: the sudden storm, the wrong turn, our night spent seeking shelter. The ranger's expression grew increasingly concerned as she listened. "You're lucky," she said when Fred finished his account. "We've had 3 hikers go missing in that area over the past 2 years. The storm's up here can be deadly if you're not prepared." She looked us over, noting our damp clothing and tired appearances. "Come inside, you can dry out properly, and I'll radio in your location so your emergency contacts know you're safe." The inside of the station was simple but wonderfully dry and warm. Wood stove glowed in one corner, and the ranger, Kelly, she introduced herself, provided us with thermal blankets and hot coffee while we shed our damp outer layers. "Search and rescue has been alerted," she informed us after making her radio call, standard procedure after hikers go missing, even briefly. "They'll probably want to check you over, but it sounds like you managed pretty well out there." Fred caught my eye across the room, a small smile playing at his lips. "We did what we had to do to survive." The double meaning wasn't lost on me, and I felt a flush rise to my cheeks that had nothing to do with the warmth of the cabin. Kelly, misinterpreting my reening face, suggested I move further from the stove. "Hypothermia recovery can make your temperature regulation a bit wonky," she explained. "Don't want to overheat you now." A helicopter arrived about an hour later. Apparently, being lost in the mountains warranted more serious evacuation measures than I'd anticipated. The search and rescue team gave us both brief medical examinations, declared us relative